on Jerusalem Dateline. This week in Jerusalem Dateline, U.S. President Trump makes a bold announcement.
Today, I am delivering.
Leaders applaud the announcement, and evangelical leaders call it historic and prophetic. But Palestinian leaders call for 3 days of rage. We take a look at one of the most historic weeks in the history of Jerusalem.
Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. This week marks one of the most momentous in the history of Jerusalem. For the first time, a U.S. president recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state. Israeli leaders applauded the announcement. Evangelical leaders called it historic and prophetic, while many Muslim and Arab leaders condemned Trump's decision. We begin our look at this week with a report by CBN White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon.
By recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving the U.S. Embassy there, President Donald Trump has secured his place in history and demonstrated another reason why Americans elected an outsider not beholden to tradition.
We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past.
After decades of failed peace negotiations and a continuation of violence, President Trump says it's time to do something different.
It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
For decades, Democrats and Republicans running for president dangled the promise of recognizing Jerusalem, only to fail to follow through once in office. President Trump delivered. He says he's just acknowledging reality, that Jerusalem has been Israel's capital for decades, and kicking off a new strategy for peace while reaffirming that the U.S. would support a two-state solution if that's what both sides agreed to.
Above all, our greatest hope is for peace, the universal yearning in every human soul.
Immediately, enthusiastic praise poured in from a diverse group of evangelical leaders. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee says President Donald Trump did what his predecessors didn't have the courage to do. In doing so, he set two great examples: how to make good on promises and how to treat your friends. Reverend Samuel Rodriguez says the historical record, empirical fact, and our faith all confirm that Jerusalem is in fact the capital of the Jewish people. I therefore enthusiastically applaud President Trump's decision. And Bishop Harry Jackson says it marks the beginning of a new season in U.S. Middle East policy. The previous administration allowed persecution, terrorism, and stereotyping of the Israeli people. President Trump called for a continuation of the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites.
Jerusalem is today and must remain a place where Jews pray at the Western Wall, where Christians walk the stations of the cross, and where Muslims worship at Al-Aqsa Mosque.
With the president's announcement, now architects, engineers, and planners will begin building America's new embassy in Jerusalem. It will take some time to complete, but the president says he's building a magnificent tribute to peace. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, the White House.
Here in Jerusalem, Israeli leaders applauded the decision. Here's a look at what they said about Trump's historic announcement and how one evangelical leader believes we're seeing prophecy unfold. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu led a chorus of Israeli officials praising and thanking President Trump.
This is a historic day. Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people for 3,000 years. It's been the capital of Israel for nearly 70 years. President Trump, thank you for today's historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful.
Just minutes after President Trump's decision, which was 8 p.m. Israel time, the city of Jerusalem adorned the walls of the old city behind me with a projected image that said, December 6th, Jerusalem applauds President Trump.
I think, if anything, this move will further and bring peace forward. since our neighbors have to realize that in any scenario, Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people.
Yet many evangelicals applauded the decision. Mike Evans of the Friends of Zion Museum in Jerusalem unfurled a banner that says, "God bless Trump from Jerusalem, D.C., David's capital, to Washington, D.C."
We believe what he did is going to bring the blessing of God on our own country, America.
Evans compared President Trump to another U.S. President, Harry Truman, who 70 years ago, against the advice of his own State Department and many advisors, recognized the newly declared State of Israel. Evans believes we're seeing prophecy come to pass.
And as somebody that's wanted and prayed and hoped for this for more than 40 years, I see us in the middle of prophecy right now.
While some believed history and prophecy were unfolding, others did not. Palestinian and Arab leaders denounced the decision, and Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas said Jerusalem would remain the eternal capital of Palestine. With threats of terror attacks and calls for rage, Israeli security services prepared for the worst. But at midday, things were relatively quiet in Jerusalem.
Our units are located and can respond if necessary. We're hoping that this afternoon will continue to be relatively calm and quiet, and that Israeli police won't have to respond to any illegal or violent demonstrations.
This is the Damascus Gate just outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, historically a place where there's been major disturbances. But so far today, just minor skirmishes and this crowd behind me chanting slogans. One slogan called for martyrs and suicide attacks. This Muslim man expressed his view of Jerusalem's future.
Jerusalem will be the capital of the world for Islamic emperor. We will write the justice for everybody all over the world.
Rioting broke out in the West Bank and Gaza on Thursday with chants of Trump, "You will see, Palestine will be free." And clashes continued on Friday in Bethlehem and the West Bank. Palestinians consider all of Jerusalem to be theirs and want at least the eastern section of the city, including the old city's Temple Mount, Western Wall, and historic churches, to be the capital of a future Palestinian state. Following Trump's speech, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas called for 3 days of rage. Abbas traveled to Jordan on Thursday to rally Arab support against Trump. He said that Trump had effectively withdrawn the U.S. from its role as a fair mediator between Israel and the Palestinians.
We believe America, with this position, has distanced itself greatly as a political actor in the Middle East because it will not get back its previous role here.
In Jordan, where more than 60% of the population is Palestinian, Jordanians protested outside the U.S. Embassy. And in Iran, demonstrators condemned Trump's decision, and Iran's leaders called for another intifada. Another senior Palestinian official, Jibril Rajoub, said that Vice President Mike Pence is not welcome in the Palestinian areas when he visits later this month. Pence was due to meet with Abbas in PA-controlled Bethlehem, but Rajoub said the meeting would not take place. In his speech, Trump said 2 decades of not moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem hadn't brought peace. His team reportedly believes that the Palestinians and other Arab countries' need for the U.S. at this time is strong enough to weather the current storm. Coming up, Trump's courage prompts other embassies to consider the move to Jerusalem when we come back. President Trump led the way in moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Now it looks as though several other countries are going to follow his lead and relocate their embassies here as well. Many Democrats supported the idea of moving our embassy to Jerusalem in the past, but they criticized President Trump once he actually made the decision. Jennifer Wishin brings us this story from Washington.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's already in touch with other countries that want to follow President Trump's lead and recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move their embassies there.
I call on all countries that seek peace to join the United States in recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and to move their embassies here.
Already, reports indicate the Philippines, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and India are all moving in that direction. Despite international criticism, officials at the White House are taking a victory lap for what they're calling the president's courageous and bold move.
Does the fact that he kept his promise give him more credibility when negotiating in the Middle East?
Certainly, I think one of the abilities to follow through on something you've committed to, as the president has done. But also, let's not forget that this was something that Congress voted on starting back in 1995 and has reaffirmed 10 separate times over the last 20 years. This is something that the president took action on, a very courageous and bold action.
But some of the Democrats who supported measures to move the embassy to Jerusalem in the past seem to be betting Trump wouldn't keep his word. The president called their bluff. Senators Bernie Sanders of Vermont, Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, Dick Durbin of Illinois, and Dianne Feinstein of California have all criticized the president's action. Not only did Senator Feinstein vote in favor of the 1995 Jerusalem Embassy Act, she was a key player in its passage. She's the senator who inserted the waiver provision that allows the president to delay the embassy move in the interest of national security, which secured the votes of 10 additional Democrats who were on the fence, giving the bill a veto-proof majority. Now she's calling the president's decision to move the embassy terrible. However, if Democrats followed their party platform, they'd support the president. The 2016 platform says while Jerusalem is a matter for final status negotiations, it should remain the capital of Israel, an undivided city accessible to people of all faiths. Similar language appears in the party's 2008 and 2004 platforms.
President Trump says his actions are part of his new strategy to achieve a peace deal. Prime Minister Netanyahu says peace is not possible without Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Up next, CBN's Scott Ross takes a look on the ground of modern-day Jerusalem, what it looks like, and why some believe it should never again be divided. After President Trump's declaration, many felt it would be the end of the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. During the history of their negotiations, when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian talks, the subject of a divided Jerusalem has often been a deal breaker for the Jewish state. But why? CBN's Scott Ross takes a look at the answer.
Jerusalem's old city, the Temple Mount, and the Mount of Olives all share common bonds. In addition to biblical significance, they're all in the part of the city Palestinians want as their future capital.
Scripture says Jerusalem is a city set on a hill.
And we are standing on the hill, the Mount of Olives, and we are overlooking the Temple Mount. Beautiful vision here of the old city, and behind it the new city.
Chaim Silberstein, founder and president of Keep Jerusalem, believes the city must remain united. We spent a day looking at Jerusalem from different angles to understand its complexity.
This is a city that's ensconced in geopolitics, in divisiveness, both within the Jewish people and certainly the Arab nations against the Jewish people.
Jerusalem has been conquered more than any other city in history, yet it's been the only capital the Jewish people have ever known. Still, the world refuses to recognize it as Israel's capital, even though it's mentioned more than 640 times in the Old Testament and not once by name in the Quran.
Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
We know that over 3,000 years ago, King David came here, he conquered Jerusalem, and he set up his capital here. And for 1,000 years, Israel had sovereignty, the Jews had sovereignty in the land of Israel. A pocket of Jews remained in Palestine, in Israel, throughout the centuries, but we only saw a real return of the Jewish people in the last 150 years or so.
On the world stage, Jerusalem is typically divided between East and West. The newer western city is primarily Jewish. The older eastern section stretches from north to south. The majority of the city's Arabs live there, but so do an almost equal number of Jewish Israelis.
With the city as it is now and the talk of dividing Jerusalem, is that realistic? A divided Jerusalem?
I think that it would be a disaster of historic proportions. and a huge mistake, because dividing up Jerusalem will create the exact opposite effect of peace.
From 1949 to 1967, Jerusalem was divided, with Jordan controlling the eastern sector. During 1967 Six-Day War, Israel took back control. The Bible calls Jerusalem the city of the great king, and it's seen many kings. In 1964, Jordan's King Hussein started building a hilltop palace on the northern edge of Jerusalem. The Six-Day War interrupted his plans.
This site where we are now is not really the palace of King Hussein, but rather the palace of King Saul.
From on high, it's easy to see why kings old and new would want to occupy this hill.
We're looking eastwards, and we're actually looking into the Judean desert. Behind the Judean desert are the mountains of Moab, which is where Jordan is today.
Oh.
So we can see all the way to the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley. What we see below us is the Jewish neighborhood of Pisgat Ze'ev, and to the north of that, Neve Yaakov. These two neighborhoods are basically nestled within Arab neighborhoods that are surrounding them. If we would cut off Jerusalem and say everything to the left of this line would be Palestine, 90,000 Jews living in these two neighborhoods would find themselves in Palestine.
How can you divide them when they're so integrated?
That is a rhetorical question.
It is.
Yes.
Looking to the north, we could see biblical Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. In the distance, just 5 miles from Jerusalem, is Ramallah, the current seat of government for the Palestinian Authority.
An important thing to understand when you want to understand the strategic issues facing Jerusalem is what is the goal of the Arabs. They understand that Jerusalem is the heart of the Jewish people, and if they can liberate Jerusalem from their point of view, then they will have succeeded in liberating Israel ultimately.
Silverstein believes the Arabs have 3 main ways they're working to liberate Jerusalem: by force, propaganda and diplomacy, and demography.
What they're doing is building and building and building inside Jerusalem, largely illegal structures. In fact, have successfully created a territorial continuum that runs from Ramallah in the north all the way through Jerusalem, through the Old City, to Bethlehem in the south. And by doing that, they would have infiltrated a demographic Trojan horse inside Jerusalem.
Do you have hope for this city to eventually be whole? Do you see a good future ahead or no?
Zechariah chapter 14 talks about what's happening here on the Mount of Olives. There'll be an earthquake here, there'll be a war, there'll be all kinds of unnatural things that are happening here.
That's yet to happen.
That's yet to happen in the future. But Zechariah ends the prophecy by saying, and Jerusalem will dwell secure. The question is how we will get there. The thing that is guaranteed to bring peace to Jerusalem is keeping Jerusalem united under Israeli sovereignty. And that certainly is the prelude to hopefully the incredible event that we hope and pray will happen later, which will be ultimate peace both to Jerusalem and the world.
Scott Ross, Jerusalem.
Coming up, what did Jerusalemites feel about President Trump, the move of the U.S. Embassy, and recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? Before Trump's announcement, CBN correspondent Julie Stahl went to Jerusalem's largest open-air market, Mahane Yehuda, to get a sense of what Israelis thought about President Trump's support for Israel, declaring Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and moving the embassy to their capital.
So what do you think about the Trump administration's support for Israel?
I think it's a strong support. I'm all for it, and I think it's very important for Israel. It's a lot better than under President Obama.
President Trump, very, very good for Israel. I like him.
President Trump is a very good man. He loves Israel, and I love him.
He will fix things that the one before him ruined.
Israel needs support because we're a tiny place.
What do you think about the possibility that he'll declare Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
I'm awaiting it every day. I'm hoping for it every day.
I'm happy with that. Finally, someone is
standing and just saying whatever, he needs to say, to the whole world, and putting, Israel on the map as it should be.
This is the capital of Israel, and this is it.
He should do it yesterday. I mean, the Hill declares it all the time. It's American law. But if you're talking about President Trump actually, I think it would be good. I mean, I think it's time to make some changes.
It'll make the Arab accept us as a country.
All the world have to recognize that Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish.
What about moving the embassy here? Should he move the embassy here?
Yeah, definitely. We will come to the embassy in Jerusalem.
I think that's where it initially belonged. I think that's where it should ultimately be in the future. And, whether it causes conflict or not, well, that's where it's supposed to be.
We don't want traffic jams here. The whole system, the buses and the trains will have to stop for dignitaries. We don't want it here. The local people don't want it.
You don't have to be too scared. You have to move the embassy to Jerusalem today.
Everything causes problems in the Middle East, but it's the right thing to do, and it's long overdue.
Those comments give you a good idea of how Israelis are feeling about President Trump's decision. And with all these developments, please continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. As the Bible teacher Derek Prince once wrote, Christians can change world history through prayer and fasting. And for continuing coverage of these unfolding events, keep following CBN News on cbnnews.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. That's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.